cost more to run government. It was less than 1%, but it was still an increase. May not be politically popular, it may not be great to run a campaign on, but it was honest. It wasn't putting it into fees. I think that there is some willingness to start looking at, modest increases to the mill rate to create more programs like that. But again, it comes back to this group and other groups like your group, really putting forth strategic ideas in terms of how that investment changes the community positively.
We've been talking a little bit about funding, and grants come up periodically as well. And if I understand correctly, the city actually has regulations about private funding and the signage or billing, some sort of adding that business's namesake per se in that area where they're providing funding. I think in some of these areas that we're looking at in the future, new transportation projects, etc., there may be businesses in the area that might invest in helping develop these programs, but I think a lot of these businesses might want some sort of return on that investment, name on a placard, name on a sign, naming a small park or something like that. What do you guys think of that, the potential of maybe changing those regulations in the future to allow for that level of investment and that kind of return for those businesses?
I've been a supporter of putting advertising in our pool area. I've been a supporter of, look, the more private funding we can get for these things, the easier it is to match that with city dollars and actually do something real. I'm not sure what ordinances or restrictions you're talking about. I guess I can certainly talk with the city attorney, and I'd like to know a little bit more about what you've heard about or what your concern is. But I mean, philosophically, if businesses are willing to give us $1 million and want naming rights on a park, great. I mean, let's talk about it. I mean, it has to be, one, it has to be, how do I say this, the right kind of business. I mean, we aren't going to after certain businesses, again, we have to be reasonable. I mean, there's probably some issues that we would run into in terms of promoting different types of businesses, but I think that there's a lot of that opportunity out there, and no reason that we can't do that. And if there's current ordinances that prohibit that, they can be changed. State law we can't change.
I'd like to hear you expand on that, because I'm not sure that I follow it. Is it, with the universities, they'll have a business school and then it'll be the Jones Business School. Is that the kind of thing you're talking
kind
about?
of. Maybe an example, I'm part of the group that's working on this proposal for a trail system utilizing the Sheehan Park for mountain bike trails. And one of the topics that's come up is signage at that park. And our understanding, or the way it's been kind of explained to us, is that a business can't come in, give the city, build the signage for that park per se as a gift to the city, and then have their name be put on that signage in the public park per se. That's kind of how it's.
Okay. I'd go along with John. I'd like to hear from the city what the restrictions are on that. I agree. I think that's if we can get somebody to do it, if you can get the trails built and the benefactor is Trek, and you call them the Trek bike trails in Sheehan Park, I mean, I don't see that that's a problem. I don't think that's, some moral inconsistency. I just don't know if there are city restrictions on that or not. Certainly not on the universities. I'm amazed at the university. There is no business school anymore. Everything has somebody's name on it, and you don't know who that somebody is. That's crazy. Somebody with a lot of money.
I'm all for public-private partnerships. If there are some restrictions that need to be discussed and looked at, but I don't see that as being a problem at all.
Anyone else?
I would like to know more about that if you want to follow up at some point as we go forward in this conversation, because there's no reason that can't be done. There's lots of places we actually do that throughout the city.
Well, you also have to be.
No, go ahead, Doug. You've been in part of that too.
Yeah, you have to be careful, right? You don't want to just open up the floodgates.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I understand mountain bike trails and stuff, but I mean, even just certain parks, if they can be like, I don't know, Culver's Park or whatever.
Sometimes the land was donated to the city, but they put restrictions on it. They I can't think of an example right now, but like the Vilas Park in in Madison, there are, the family estate that gave it to the city, they put restrictions on.
Right.
And that may be the barrier, I don't know.
So, anyone else have any more questions? Because these gentlemen have been here for a while and everybody's, I do have one question. When we started this group about a year or so ago, the finding someone to speak with in the city who was responsible for our concerns, it was, I mean, the city staff has really been excellent, the police department, the engineering department, each individual has been really helpful, and including the elected officials have been really helpful. What would it take to have a liaison that kind of, when in Madison, for example, I'm part of the county planning for the MPO for the county. There's one person in Madison, when there's a cycling question, they know who to talk to. We're not Madison, I don't want to be Madison, frankly, but it would be nice to be able to have a kind of a central contact point, someone who could speak with, authority on the part of the city. How could that be done?
For biking specifically, are you thinking, Al, or are you saying anytime there's an issue?
I was thinking cycling in particular, but it could be greater than that. I'm a little focused.
Are you talking about somebody that works for the city, or somebody who?
Someone, whether it's an elected official or a staff member, I don't really know.
It could be a job assignment for somebody in Parks and Recreation, say a certain percentage of their job is advocacy or whatever you want to call liaison with the bicycle community. I mean, I don't see that as being a big deal, but I don't run the city either. But I mean, it would certainly be possible. In state government where I work, that's not uncommon. There's a role comes up, they need somebody to be a liaison with all the Indian tribes in the state. They assign it to somebody. It's not their only job, but it's part of their job.
I'd agree with Bill that I think it's a staff function, and you identify somebody, and if biking becomes a big enough factor in the city, then somebody, and I would think in Park and Rec, I think that would be the area that you would go to, and then you would expect that person would then interact with the rest of the city, with the police department, engineering, and so forth.
Back in, I believe it was 2012, there was a significant change when Bob Holling actually left the Parks Department in terms of management supervision and then the people who were actually working in that department. And we spent the last several years undoing some of those changes. For one of those changes was we actually had the Parks Department reporting, at least the Park and Rec portion, reporting to our Economic Development Director, which that on a whole host of levels, he has other things to do that we need him to do to make this community successful. It was a terrible match. I didn't support it at the time and have worked several years to actually undo that. One of the positions was a park supervisor position that actually was eliminated at that point because part of Bob's role, they eliminated Bob's role and they put people at a lower level in charge of the recreation department and in terms of park maintenance. And one of the things that we're bringing back in 2015, I'm trying to remember the exact date, I think it was an April start date, so it'll probably be advertised actually coming up here before too long, is another park supervisor position. It's going to be paid for in part because it's going to be very much a planning position. It's going to be in part funded through the park fund. Because sometimes we go out and we hire people to plan parks, and sometimes we do it in-house. And we really feel like we need somebody that, again, can bring a lot of those components together. So I think you may see actually some of those components come back. Again, there was a lot of changes made at that point in time. We've slowly undone those. We also promoted Lee Eigel to Public Works Director when Larry Herman left, and that left a void in terms of that whole park maintenance, park planning position that we really had to go back and backfill. And so it's taken some time. Lee was promoted, I guess, a year or so ago now. So we're continuing to work through that, and I think that we also see the value in having a single person to talk to in terms of planning issues, so.
I'd suggest that while the parks is perhaps a pretty significant part, and I know the Transportation Commission is really focused on the taxi and that type of thing, but I would suggest that perhaps it's not just a park, but how do you get one of our charters for our group is to make 90% of Sun Prairie accessible by bicycle. And so that, while parks are certainly a part of that, I don't really know who takes care of the bike path that comes out from behind, over on, the neighborhood on the other side of Bird Street, for example. But there's some beautiful trails in this, and they're, one of our charters also is for us internally is to try to help with connectivity. So I would suggest that it's not just parks. It's like
I agree with you. I mean, and again, there's a lot of things that go under each of these departments, and certainly parks include really that trail network that I think is important to what you're talking about. Because they interconnect parks, and somebody here said that has to be one of our goals, we really need them to work with city engineering. So there's multiple departments within the city, but we need to have one area of contact. And I think what I'm trying to convey to you is that that person will likely work within the Parks Department, and they will have far more responsibilities than just planning parks or planning bike trails. It's also about how we deal with trees and all sorts of other things that actually impact parks. But that single point of contact is what I'm trying to convey.
And I guess the last question is, how can this group work better with the city? Is it the kind of, I mean, April's not so far away. Is it wait for that kind of liaison to happen? And, I mean, this is part of the, hopefully this will help a bit. How can we, when we look at, somebody's going to soon be looking at the whole town, within our group, we're getting volunteers and we're gonna ride that map. We're gonna ride that map and see what the shortcomings are. Perfect. How do we get that information to the city to try to?
I would put it down on paper. I'd write it up and put together a report from your advocacy group and give it to every elected official. Give it to the mayor, give it to the entire city council, and let them digest it, and then share it with the department heads, and just say, here's what we found, here's the map, here's the problem areas, here's our recommendations. That's basically what they do in government, and keep it short, sweet, to the point, and people will digest that, and you might get something out of that. And then start talking to elected officials again about proposing a resolution that would maybe implement some of it.
Sorry, I was just going to intervene for just a second. So that is the path we went with the mountain bike trail, and that has come back to, I don't want to say bite us, but we've got opposition to it.
Well, you never know what all the entire global story is in any kind of issue. I mean, you deal with that. Sometimes the best intentions, right? And you get something moving, you think, hey, we've got momentum, let's get this done, and then something comes up. It's like, well, we're going to have to sit down and figure out how to get past that barrier.
I guess what I was getting at is I completely understand how to come about it.
Yeah.
But there needs to be a better way to, once the proposal's out there, to get it out to the general public.
Sure.
Because, I mean, short of put it in the paper and the Star saying, here's the proposal. Because I don't know what the subscription rate is.
A lot of people have a website.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, if that's the path, that's fine.
I would respectfully tell you, I don't know that I don't think the path is ineffective.
Okay.
I think that it has to be a combination of a couple of things. One, have more forums like this, because a report is just I'm not trying to diminish what you've done.
No,
a report is a bunch of words on paper. I have stacks and stacks of reports in my office, and the thing that gets public officials engaged is to get them at these sorts of meetings and say, hey, these are the great things that we want to accomplish. How do we get advocates for this rather than